Hey guys, tonight we begin with the low creak of wagon wheels and the soft, impatient snort of oxen as you stand at the edge of a wide, dusty clearing that people confidently call a trailhead. The air smells faintly of trampled grass, canvas, and ambition. You are surrounded by wagons that look sturdy enough from a distance, but up close reveal uneven boards, patched canvas, and nails that already seem tired. Somewhere nearby, a baby fusses, a man coughs, and an iron pot clanks against a wheel rim. This is the Oregon Trail, and you are about to take your very first mile.
You probably won't survive this, not because of anything dramatic, but because history has a way of quietly eroding confidence, one small inconvenience at a time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift your weight from one boot to the other, already noticing that the ground is less friendly than it looked. This first mile is supposed to be easy. That's what everyone says. The trail at the start of the Oregon Trail, often near Independence or St. Joseph, Missouri, was busy, almost festive during peak migration years in the 1840s and early 1850s. A mainstream historical fact is that tens of thousands of emigrants gathered here each spring, waiting for grass to grow just enough to feed their oxen. You can imagine the nervous optimism hanging in the air, like steam from a pot that hasn't quite reached a boil.
You glance at your wagon, which you have packed with care, or at least with the kind of care that feels responsible in the moment. Flour barrels, sacks of beans, maybe a slab of bacon salted with an inch of its life. Historians still argue whether most emigrants overpacked or underpacked, because diaries suggest both happened at the same time. You feel reassured knowing that confusion is historically accurate. That's comforting, in a way. As the signal finally comes to move out, the wagon lurches forward with a wooden groan that sounds like a complaint. Your oxen lean into the yoke, muscles shifting under dull hides, and suddenly you are moving. Slowly, painfully slowly. Modern you might already be checking your phone for step count, realizing that 1 mile should take about 20 minutes. On the Oregon Trail, that mile can take an hour, especially when everyone ahead of you is also discovering that enthusiasm does not translate into traction. Dust begins to rise almost immediately. It coats your boots, then your trousers, then the inside of your mouth. You try breathing through your nose, but that just gives the dust a more direct route. One light joke floats through your mind. You have invented the world's first dry seasoning blend entirely by accident. You swallow, anyway. Around you, conversations start and stop in fragments. People call out reminders about loose barrels or wandering children. There's a shared sense that everyone is watching everyone else, quietly measuring competence. You become acutely aware of your own posture, your grip on the wagon tongue, the way you walk. This is not a performance you rehearsed. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts as you walk. Some emigrants believed that carrying a hair comb made of certain materials could ward off bad luck. It didn't, but it did give them something small and solid to hold onto when the wheel started to sink into mud later on. You, meanwhile, have optimism and a hat that already feels too warm. The trail itself is not a neat line. It's a braided mess of ruts, some deep enough to catch a wheel, others fading into grass. You quickly learn that choosing where to place your feet is a constant decision-making exercise. Step wrong, and you twist an ankle. Step too confidently, and you trip over a root. This first mile teaches you that the land does not care about your plans. There's a gentle sarcasm in the way history unfolds here. You expected danger to announce itself with drama. Instead, it arrives as inconvenience. The sun creeps higher, and you realize you are already sweating more than planned. Another joke drifts in, uninvited. This is the least scenic gym membership you've ever had, and there's no quitting policy. You pass other wagons pulled over to the side. Someone is already fixing a loose wheel. Another family is arguing quietly about whether they should have left earlier in the morning. A mainstream fact surfaces again. Many trail diaries mention breakdowns within the first few days, sometimes the first few hours. The trail wastes no time establishing expectations.
As you walk, you start to notice the sounds. The rhythmic clop of hooves, the creak of leather, the occasional crack of a whip, used more as suggestion than punishment. Oxen respond better to patience than force, which is an early lesson in emotional regulation. Historians still argue whether oxen were truly superior to horses for the journey, but you don't feel like debating it right now. You just want them to keep moving.
Your mind wanders, because walking does that. You think about home, already oddly distant. You think about the idea of land at the end of this trail, a place you've never seen, but already feel responsible for reaching. That imagined future pulls you forward more than the wagon does. The first mile ends without ceremony. There's no sign, no announcement. The ground simply levels out, and someone ahead calls for a brief stop. You realize your shoulders ache, your hands are dusty, your mouth is dry. This is after 1 mile, not a river crossing, not a mountain pass, just walking. Another quirky detail surfaces. Some immigrants marked early miles with small personal rituals, like counting steps or saying a prayer at each stop. It gave shape to time that otherwise blurred together. You consider doing the same, then forget, distracted by the simple joy of sitting down. As you rest, you look back the way you came. The trailhead is already hard to distinguish from the rest of the landscape. That's when it settles in. The quiet understanding that turning back would be its own kind of failure, and moving forward will demand this same effort again and again. The first mile has not injured you, hasn't tested your courage in any heroic way. It has simply introduced you to the steady erosion of comfort. And that, you sense, is how the Oregon Trail really works. The wagons creak back into motion, and you feel the first mile still sitting in your legs as if it plans to stay a while. There's a dull, friendly ache behind your knees, the kind that suggests tomorrow will be worse. You walk alongside the wagon, one hand resting on the rough wood, as if steadying yourself more than the vehicle. The oxen lean forward again, and you're struck by how much trust you've placed in animals that have no concept of Oregon, California, or manifest destiny. They just know forward, grass, and rest. This is the stage where optimism is still riding high. You hear laughter, someone tells a story that isn't very funny, but everyone laughs anyway because it feels better than silence. The wagon train stretches out in a long, uneven line, like a thought that hasn't quite decided where it's going. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your awareness. Many wagon trains organize themselves into loose companies for safety and cooperation, electing a captain and setting basic rules. It sounds orderly on paper. In practice, it's more like herding tired humans instead of cats, which may actually be harder.
Your wagon is your world now. The wood frame, the canvas top, the crates and barrels inside, they are your moving house. You glance up at the white canvas, glowing softly in the sun, and imagine how it will look after weeks of dust, rain, and smoke. It's strange how quickly something new starts to feel fragile. The optimism you packed so carefully is already showing wear at the edges.
Oxen set the pace, and that pace is slow enough to feel insulting if you're in a hurry, and merciful if you're already tired. Each step they take is deliberate. You begin to match their rhythm, falling into a walking pattern that feels less like marching and more like drifting. It's not fast, but it's steady. Historians still argue whether immigrants underestimated just how slow this pace would feel, day after day. You don't need the debate. Your legs are voting, and they are voting for slower, please.
You notice how often you look at the oxen's backs, at the way their muscles ripple under skin marked with dust and old scars. There's something oddly calming about their predictability. They don't rush, they don't panic, they simply lean forward and exist. Light joke number 1 for this section: you briefly wonder if you can take lessons from an ox on work-life balance. Spoiler, the ox is winning. Inside the wagon, things shift and thump. Every bump in the trail sends a reminder that your belongings are not as secure as you thought. A barrel knocks against a crate, a pot lid rattles like it's trying to escape. You make a mental note to tighten ropes later, then realize you've already made that note twice. This is how small tasks multiply on the trail, not dramatically, but persistently. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Some emigrants believed that decorating their oxen with ribbons or bits of cloth would encourage better spirits, both for the animals and for themselves. It probably didn't make the oxen happier, but it did make the people smile. You imagine tying a ribbon to a horn and decide that morale is a legitimate survival strategy. As the day stretches on, you start to see how optimism and exhaustion can coexist. You are excited and tired at the same time, which is a strange emotional cocktail. You talk with someone walking nearby. The conversation drifts from where you're headed to what you left behind, then back again. Everyone seems to be carrying a version of the same story. Hope mixed with uncertainty, wrapped in a layer of practical concern about whether the flour will last. You hear someone mention that oxen are preferred because they can survive on rough grass and are less likely to panic than horses. That's another mainstream historical point. Oxen were cheaper, tougher, and more forgiving. They were slow, yes, but reliable. You watch one flick its tail lazily at a fly and think, yes, that is the energy I need to cultivate. Historians still argue whether speed or reliability mattered more in survival rates. Some diaries suggest faster parties avoided certain dangers, while others point out that rushing led to breakdowns and injuries. You, meanwhile, are just trying to keep your footing and not trip over a rut. The academic debate feels very far away from your dusty boots. Light joke number 2 arrives as you trip slightly, recover, and pretend nothing happened. You tell yourself that if anyone asks, you are just testing the ground, very thoroughly, with your face. As the sun moves higher, the heat becomes more noticeable. You loosen your collar, wipe your forehead, and take a sip from your water supply. Even that small action carries weight. You are suddenly aware that every swallow is part of a larger equation. Drink too much, and you risk running low later. Drink too little, and you risk feeling like a dried-out piece of trail jerky. It's a delicate balance, and you are already bad at it. The wagon train stops briefly to let everyone adjust loads and check animals. You lean against a wheel and listen to the soft ticking of hot metal cooling slightly. The smell of warm wood and leather hangs in the air. It's oddly comforting, familiar even. Your world has shrunk to a few smells, a few sounds, a few faces. A fringe tidbit slips in. There are stories of emigrants talking to their wagons as if they were stubborn pets, thanking them when they survived rough patches. You consider trying it, then realize you already muttered, "Don't you dare, hit a loose board earlier." Congratulations, you are historically accurate. Light joke number 3. You imagine starting a motivational speaking business for wagons. You can do it, wheel number 3. I believe in you. As you set off again, you feel the rhythm settle in. Step, creak, snort, dust. It's almost meditative. This is where you begin to understand that survival on the trail is less about dramatic moments and more about enduring repetition. The optimism you felt at the trailhead hasn't vanished, but it has changed shape. It's quieter now, less shiny, more practical. You look ahead at the line of wagons stretching into the distance. Each one carries a small universe of hopes, fears, and supplies. You are one universe among many, moving at the pace of oxen, bound together by shared slowness. This second section of your journey doesn't test you with danger, it tests you with patience. It asks whether you can accept that your life now moves at the speed of a wooden wheel and an animal's steady breath. And as you take another step, you realize that surviving even a single mile is less about heroics and more about learning to be exactly as slow as the trail demands. By the time the wagon train settles into its next slow stretch, your attention drifts inward to the contents of the wagon itself. Packing felt decisive back at the trailhead. It was all lists and confident nods. Now, as the wheels roll and every bump sends a reminder through the wood, you begin to realize that what you brought matters more than you expected, and what you didn't bring will soon feel very loud. You walk alongside the wagon and mentally inventory its contents, like checking on old friends. Flour, beans, bacon, coffee, tools wrapped in cloth, extra shoes, maybe one pair already questionable. A few personal items tucked away where they won't rattle too much. A mainstream historical fact quietly surfaces. Emigrant guidebooks of the time recommended very specific supply lists, down to exact poundage per person. Flour was king. Bacon was a close second. Everything else fought for space and relevance. The thing is, those lists assumed perfect conditions and perfect discipline. You're neither a list nor perfect conditions. Every item has weight, and weight is the enemy of progress. Overpacking strains oxen and axles. Underpacking strains morale and stomachs. Historians still argue whether most trail deaths were more closely linked to poor planning or bad luck. But standing here, you suspect the answer is an unhelpful blend of both. The wagon hits a rut, and something inside shifts with a hollow thud. You wince, even though nothing is visibly broken. Yet. You picture your supplies like a game of historical Jenga. Remove the wrong thing, and the whole structure wobbles. Food is the first thing your mind returns to, again and again. Meals on the trail are simple by necessity. There's no variety for variety's sake. You eat to move, not to celebrate. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some immigrants packed spices, not because they changed nutrition, but because familiar flavors made monotonous food easier to tolerate. A pinch of pepper could feel like civilization. You silently thank your past self for including it, even if it meant leaving behind an extra shirt. Light joke number 1 drifts in as you imagine future you whispering sweet nothings to a sack of flour. You complete me, you murmur internally, very seriously. Tools matter just as much as food, maybe more. An axe, a hammer, spare parts for the wagon, these are not optional accessories. They are survival. Wagons broke constantly. Axles snapped, wheels cracked. A mainstream fact presses in. Broken wagons were so common that abandoned debris lined parts of the trail, forming a strange archaeological breadcrumb path of lost hopes and snapped timbers. You glance at the toolbox and feel a flicker of pride. You brought tools. You are responsible. And yet, a quiet doubt creeps in. Do you know how to use all of them properly? Historians still argue whether access to tools or mechanical skill mattered more on the trail. Right now, the difference feels academic. You make a mental note to stand closer to anyone who looks handy. Clothing becomes the next concern. You packed for all seasons, or at least you thought you did. The reality of the trail laughs gently at that confidence. Clothes wear out faster than expected. Boots soften, then fail. Fabric tears on brush and wagon nails. Another quirky tidbit floats up. Some immigrants cut down heavy clothing to save weight, only to regret it later when weather shifted. You touch your sleeves and hope they last longer than your optimism. Light joke number 2 arrives as you imagine future historians examining a single sock you lost along the way and debating its cultural significance. This sock, they'll say, clearly belonged to someone who underestimated laundry. Personal items carry a different weight. Letters, small books, trinkets. They don't keep you fed or fix a wheel, but they keep you human. You packed 1 or 2 things like this, something small and sentimental. Historians still argue how much emotional resilience mattered compared to physical supplies, but diaries suggest that familiar objects provided comfort during long, quiet stretches. You run your fingers over a tucked-away keepsake and feel grounded, just for a moment.
The wagon train stops briefly, and you take the opportunity to adjust a rope that's digging into a crate. You tighten it, then tighten it again, because experience is already teaching you that good enough is rarely enough. Around you, others are doing the same. Barrels are shifted, bundles are retied. Someone curses softly when they realize something important is harder to reach than planned.
You notice trade happening even this early. A little extra coffee exchanged for a spare strap, a tin cup for a needle. This informal economy is already alive, fueled by uneven packing choices. A mainstream fact slips in. Trading among emigrants was common, but it also led to conflict when scarcity increased. Right now, it feels friendly. Later, it may not. Light joke number 3. You imagine leaving a 5-star review for someone who trades you a functional needle. Would barter again, you think.
As the wagon moves on, you feel the subtle shift in your mindset. Packing was once about preparation. Now it's about maintenance. Every day will slowly turn your carefully chosen items into worn, diminished versions of themselves. You will constantly decide what to repair, what to replace, and what to abandon. That last one is the hardest. Leaving something behind feels like admitting failure, even when it's necessary.
A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants deliberately discarded items early in the journey to reduce weight, even if the items were useful, betting on lighter loads over preparedness. Others clung to possessions long past their usefulness. Historians still argue which strategy worked better overall. You suspect the real answer depended on the day, the weather, and sheer luck. You walk a little farther behind the wagon now, giving yourself space to think. The trail stretches ahead, and you realize that every mile will quietly test your packing choices. Not all at once, just enough to keep you slightly uneasy. This third stretch of your journey doesn't punish you yet. It educates you. It teaches you that survival on the Oregon Trail isn't about dramatic moments of loss, but about a long series of small, practical decisions. You packed what you thought mattered. Now the trail will tell you, one creak and rattle at a time, what actually does. The trail narrows without warning. Not dramatically, just enough that you notice it with a small tightening in your chest. One moment there were faint hints of roads, wagon ruts layered over older wagon ruts, and the next those signs thin out, as if the land has decided it's done offering guidance. You step forward anyway, because that's the only direction available. This is the quiet moment where you realize you've left familiar roads behind. The ground under your boots changes texture. Less packed, more forgiving in some places, trickier in others. Grass gives way to dirt to a confusing mix of roots and shallow ruts that don't quite line up with your wheels. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Much of the Oregon Trail wasn't a formal road at all, but a series of paths worn into the landscape by repeated use. Early travelers relied heavily on previous wagon tracks, which could disappear after a single heavy rain. You glance ahead, looking for something definitive to follow. There isn't much, just the faint promise that other people have gone this way before and probably survived long enough to leave marks. That has to be enough. You start paying closer attention to landmarks now. A lone tree, a bend in the land, a rise that offers a slightly wider view. These small details suddenly feel important, like breadcrumbs in a story you're actively writing with your feet. Historians still argue whether emigrants relied more on guidebooks or on-the-ground observation. Walking here, you suspect it was both, layered with a generous amount of guessing.
The wagon rolls forward, wheels crunching softly over uneven ground. You find yourself walking more slowly, scanning where you step, scanning where the wagon will roll next. This is less about speed now and more about awareness. You're learning to read the land in a basic, practical way. Where water might collect, where mud might hide, where a wheel could slip just enough to make your afternoon complicated. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some emigrants believed certain landmarks were bad luck if passed on the wrong side. Rocks, trees, oddly shaped hills. Superstition crept in easily when maps were vague and stakes were high. You don't fully believe it, but you do find yourself giving a wide berth to a strangely twisted stop, just in case. No harm in being polite to fate. Light joke number 1 slips in as you realize you've just apologized to the trail under your breath. "Sorry," you mutter, stepping around a rock. The trail, unsurprisingly, does not respond. The sense of leaving things behind becomes more pronounced here, not just physical places, but mental ones. The idea that help is nearby starts to fade. The background hum of civilization, shops, neighbors, familiar routines, falls quiet. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Once wagon trains moved far enough west, resupplying became difficult or impossible, increasing reliance on what they carried and what they could trade or forage. You feel that shift even now, early on. There's a subtle tightening around every decision. Do you stop to adjust the load, or keep moving while momentum is good? Do you follow the deeper ruts that promise familiarity, or the shallower ones that look less worn but less proven? Historians still argue whether sticking to established tracks was safer than exploring alternate paths to avoid congestion. Right now, congestion feels theoretical. Uncertainty does not. The land opens slightly, offering a wider view. It's not dramatic, but it's enough to remind you how small you are out here. The sky feels larger. The horizon stretches without any obvious sign of where you're meant to go next. You feel a mix of awe and mild discomfort. It's beautiful in a quiet way, but beauty doesn't help you decide which rut to follow. Light joke number 2 drifts in as you imagine asking the horizon for directions. "Excuse me," you'd say politely, "are we doing this right?" The horizon, like the trail, remains unhelpfully silent. You notice how people around you react differently to this shift. Some walk with more confidence, heads up, as if pretending certainty will summon it. Others slow down, eyes fixed on the ground, focused on immediate problems. Neither approach feels clearly correct. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some emigrants carried compasses, but lacked the training to use them effectively, leading to misplaced confidence. You glance at your own sense of direction and decide humility is probably safer. As the wagon train moves on, small decisions begin to stack. You choose a path around a patch of soft earth rather than through it. You guide the oxen slightly left to avoid a dip. These choices feel minor, but you sense they add up. One wrong turn doesn't end a journey. Many small ones might. Light joke number 3 appears as you realize you're now celebrating minor victories, like avoiding mud. You feel proud. This is your life now. Congratulations. A break is called, and you take a moment to sit on a low rise, looking back. The trail behind you is already less distinct than you expected. The marks fade quickly, softened by grass and dust. It's a quiet reminder that the trail doesn't preserve memory, it erases it. Future travelers will follow their own lines, and yours will blend in or vanish entirely. Historians still argue how disoriented early travelers felt compared to those who followed later, more established routes. Sitting here, you imagine that disorientation wasn't always dramatic panic. Sometimes it was just this low-level unease, this constant sense of asking, "Is this right?" without ever fully answering it. You stand, dust yourself off, and move forward again. The wagon creaks obligingly. The oxen step into their work. You follow, because that's the rhythm you've learned. Step, scan, adjust. Step, scan, adjust. Leaving the road behind doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments like this, when the land stops offering clear instructions and starts asking you to pay attention. You haven't failed yet, but you've learned something important. The trail will not guide you. It will only respond to where you place your feet. The river appears gradually, almost politely, as if it doesn't want to alarm you. At first, it's just a darker line in the landscape, a suggestion of green where grass grows thicker. Then you hear it, a low, constant sound that doesn't rise or fall like wind. Water. You walk a little faster without meaning to, curiosity tugging you forward. Rivers, after all, sound useful, refreshing, cooperative. Up close, it looks calm enough. The surface moves smoothly, catching light and slow ripples. It doesn't roar or foam, it simply flows, unbothered by your arrival. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly. Rivers were among the most dangerous obstacles on the Oregon Trail.
You stop at the bank with the rest of the wagon train. People gather, shading their eyes, judging depth by color and speed. You do the same, though you're not entirely sure what you're looking for. Clear water means shallow, right? Dark means deep. Someone confidently says one thing, someone else says the opposite. Historians still argue whether most river crossing decisions were based on experience or guesswork. From what you can tell, it's mostly guesswork wearing a confident hat. You kneel and dip your fingers into the water. It's colder than expected. Not painfully so, but enough to make you pull back instinctively. Cold water has a way of sharpening the mind. Suddenly, the river's calm feels less reassuring. Water moves, whether you want it to or not. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some emigrants believed that crossing rivers early in the morning was safer because water levels were lower. Others insisted on waiting until afternoon warmth. Both groups swore by their method. You glance at the sky, then at the water, and feel the familiar weight of decisions with no clear answer. Light joke number 1 arrives as you imagine giving the river a star rating. Looks peaceful, you'd say, but hides commitment issues. Oxen are led closer to the bank. They snort, uncertain, hooves shifting. Animals sense things you don't. That alone is unsettling. You watch how the water tugs at submerged grasses, how it presses steadily against rocks. It's not dramatic, but it's persistent. That persistence is what worries you. There's discussion now about how to cross. Ford it straight through? Unload the wagon and float it? Caulk the seams with pitch or even buffalo fat? A mainstream fact surfaces. Many emigrants dismantled wagons or waterproofed them for river crossings, while others simply tried to drive through and hope for the best, heavily on river conditions, load weight, and timing. You listen to the debate with half an ear, aware that whatever decision is made will feel final once it starts. Rivers don't do takebacks. Light joke number 2 sneaks in as you realize you're rooting for the least wet option, even though all options involve water. You are, apparently, a creature of denial. Eventually, a decision forms by consensus, or at least by exhaustion. The wagons will ford here, one at a time. You feel your stomach tighten. The oxen are guided forward, hooves splashing into the shallows. The water rises around their legs, darkening their hides. You step in behind them, boots immediately soaked. Cold water floods around your ankles, then your calves, stealing warmth with shocking efficiency. The wagon follows, wheels dipping, water pushing against wood. You grip the side, muscles tense. The current presses harder than you expected, tugging sideways, testing balance. You understand now why calm water is misleading. It doesn't need to rush to be strong. Halfway across, the water reaches the wagon bed. Your heart thumps. Someone calls out. Another person steadies a wheel. This is not panic, exactly. It's focused urgency. A fringe tidbit slips into your mind. Diaries describe river crossings as eerily quiet, people concentrating too hard to talk. You feel that silence now, broken only by splashing and the low sounds of effort. Light joke number 3 surfaces, thin but sincere. You promise yourself you will never complain about stepping in a puddle again. Ever. The oxen keep moving. Slowly. Steadily.
Their hooves find purchase on the riverbed, and you realize how much you trust them in this moment. They don't rush. They don't hesitate. They simply do what they've been doing all day. Step forward. The far bank comes closer. The water shallows. The wagon emerges dripping, wood darkened and heavy. You step out onto solid ground, boots squelching, legs trembling more from relief than cold. A quiet exhale ripples through the group. You didn't cheer. You didn't feel like that kind of moment. It felt private, earned.
A mainstream fact settles in afterward. Many emigrants lost supplies during river crossings, even when wagons didn't overturn. Water damage ruined food, soaked clothing, warped tools. You check your wagon quickly, taking stock. Some things are wet. Nothing seems lost, for now. You spread items to dry in the sun. Clothes, blankets, sacks. The river glides past behind you, already indifferent to your success. Historians still argue whether fear or fatigue made river crossings more dangerous. Sitting here, wringing water from fabric, you suspect it was the combination. Tired people make hurried choices. Water doesn't care.
As you rest, you look back at the crossing point. It looks the same as before. Calm, inviting. You know better now. Rivers don't announce their danger. They wait for you to underestimate them. This mile, this crossing, has taken more out of you than the last. Not physically, maybe, but mentally. You've learned that the trail's biggest challenges don't always look like challenges at all. Sometimes they look like something peaceful you're tempted to trust. You shoulder your damp pack, guide the wagon forward, and leave the river behind. Its quiet persistence lingers in your thoughts as you walk on. A reminder that survival on the Oregon Trail often depended on respecting what looked harmless.
Not long after the river fades behind you, hunger begins to speak up. Not loudly at first, just a polite clearing of the throat somewhere in your stomach. You notice it while walking, a small hollow feeling that reminds you it's been a while since you last ate something substantial. You tell yourself it's fine. You planned for this. You have supplies. You have math. Food math, however, is already starting to misbehave.
You stop with the wagon train to make a simple meal. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep moving. A mainstream historical fact slips in gently. Most emigrants ate the same basic foods day after day. Flour, bacon, beans, coffee, because variety was a luxury that didn't survive long journeys. You scoop flour carefully, already aware that every scoop is part of a long-term calculation. You try to remember how many mouths you're feeding, how many days you estimated, how much ground you expect to cover. The numbers made sense on paper. Standing here, stirring a pot over a modest fire, they feel less cooperative. Portions shrink without you consciously deciding they should. You tell yourself it's just being sensible, conservative, responsible. You eat, and it helps. A little. Enough to take the edge off, not enough to feel satisfied. That's when you realize something important. Hunger on the trail isn't dramatic starvation. It's a low, constant presence, a background app you can't close.
Historians still argue whether calorie shortages were more dangerous than sudden illness in the early stages of the journey. Many diaries suggest people didn't realize they were undereating until weakness crept in weeks later. You glance at your bowl and wonder if you're already laying groundwork for that future version of yourself. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Some emigrants believed drinking coffee suppressed hunger and boosted morale, which led to surprisingly careful rationing of coffee beans. You take a sip and feel a flicker of gratitude that borders on affection. Coffee isn't just a beverage anymore. It's emotional support.
Light joke number 1 drifts in as you consider writing the coffee a thank you note. Dear coffee, you think, you are doing a lot of heavy lifting right now. After the meal, you repack supplies and do the math again. Flour barrel weight minus today's usage, divided by estimated days remaining. It should work. It should.
And yet, you can already see how easy it would be for the math to slip. An extra scoop here, a slightly larger portion there, a day when cooking takes longer, and hunger wins.
You walk on, and the trail seems longer than it did earlier. Hunger sharpens awareness. Every smell carries weight now. Someone frying bacon nearby feels like a personal challenge. You focus on the rhythm of walking to distract yourself. Step, breathe. Don't think about food. A mainstream fact presses in quietly. Emigrants often underestimated how much physical labor increased caloric needs. Walking all day, handling wagons, managing animals, it burned more energy than many anticipated. You feel that truth in your legs, in the faint heaviness behind your eyes.
Light joke number 2 appears as you imagine your modern self reading nutrition labels and laughing nervously. Serving size, you'd mutter. Adorable. As afternoon wears on, you notice people talking about food more often. Not complaining exactly, just mentioning it. What they miss, what they're saving, what they wish they'd packed more of. Food becomes a social topic, a shared preoccupation. You listen, nodding, mentally adjusting your own expectations.
A fringe tidbit slips in. Some immigrants experimented with foraging early on, supplementing rations with wild plants or small game. It sometimes helped, it sometimes didn't. Historians still argue how effective foraging really was, given the time and energy it required. You eye the landscape with curiosity, then skepticism. You know just enough to be cautious. The wagon train stops again, and you take the opportunity to check supplies more thoroughly. You open sacks, peer inside barrels, feel weight by hand. It's reassuring and unsettling at the same time. Everything looks fine, which is exactly how problems begin.
Light joke number 3 surfaces as you realize you're now emotionally invested in a sack of beans. You resist the urge to give it a name. As evening approaches, another meal is prepared, smaller than the last. You notice it immediately, even though no one comments. This is how rationing happens, not with announcements, but with subtle adjustments. You eat slowly, stretching the experience, hoping your stomach can be convinced that less is enough. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Many immigrants reported losing weight steadily over the journey, even when food supplies lasted. Constant activity and limited portions reshaped bodies quietly. You feel that process beginning, not painfully, just persistently. After reading, you sit near the fire, listening to low conversation and the occasional crackle of wood. Hunger hums in the background, not loud enough to dominate, but too present to ignore. You think about tomorrow and the day after that, and how many meals stand between you and uncertainty.
Historians still argue whether strict rationing from the start improved survival rates compared to adjusting as supplies dwindled. Sitting here, watching embers glow, you suspect there was no perfect system, only choices made daily under slightly different conditions. You lie down that night feeling tired, fed enough to sleep, but not enough to forget about food entirely. Your thoughts drift lazily, circling back to flour and beans and how long they might last. The trail has taught you another quiet lesson. Survival isn't about one big shortage. It's about 1,000 small decisions that slowly reshape your expectations.
As you settle in, you realize that food math doesn't fail all at once. It slips, gradually, politely. And if you don't notice it soon enough, it will decide things for you. The first sign that illness is nearby isn't dramatic. No one collapses, no alarms sound. It arrives quietly, folded into the ordinary rhythm of the trail. You notice it in a cough that lingers a little too long, in the way someone walks more slowly than yesterday, in a face that looks slightly dull around the eyes. Sickness doesn't announce itself out here. It blends in. You walk alongside the wagon and hear it again. A cough. dry and persistent. You tell yourself it's just dust. Everyone is breathing dust. That explanation is comforting because it suggests the problem is temporary, environmental, solvable. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Illness was the leading cause of death on the Oregon Trail, with diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid spreading easily through close camps and shared water sources. Standing here now, that fact feels distant, like something that happens later, to other people. You're still early in the journey, still mostly clean, still confident in your own resilience. This is how illness likes to be approached, with mild underestimation. You stop briefly, and someone nearby mentions a headache. Someone else complains of stomach trouble. The words are casual, tossed into conversation without weight. No one wants to dwell on it. Dwelling feels dangerous, like inviting something closer.
Historians still argue whether emigrants understood germ theory well enough to prevent illness effectively. The answer is mostly no. You too don't fully understand what's happening when someone gets sick. You just know that water matters, cleanliness matters, and sometimes that isn't enough. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some emigrants believed strong smells could ward off disease, leading them to carry pungent herbs or vinegar-soaked cloths. It didn't work, but it gave them a sense of control. You catch a whiff of vinegar nearby and feel oddly reassured, even as you know better.
Light joke number 1 arrives softly as you realize humanity has always been like this. If it smells intense, you think, it must be doing something. As the day goes on, you notice how sickness slows everything. Someone needs to ride in a wagon instead of walking. Someone else takes on extra work to compensate. The trail doesn't pause for illness, but it does stretch around it, redistributing effort in quiet, uneven ways. You feel the added weight in your own legs as you help more, push more, adjust more.
A mainstream fact presses in. Many wagon trains tried to isolate sick members when possible, though space and understanding were limited. You see this happen now, gently. Someone is encouraged to rest farther from the main cooking area. Utensils are kept separate. It's not fear-driven, it's cautious. Historians still argue whether isolation actually helped reduce disease spread under trail conditions. Sitting with your own cup, careful not to mix it up with others, you suspect it helped a little. Maybe not enough, but a little mattered.
Light joke number 2 slips in as you realize you're guarding your cup like a prized possession. This is my cup, you think. There are many like it, but this one is mine. Water becomes a focus again. You watch where it's drawn, how it's used. The river crossing earlier feels relevant now. You remember how easily water can carry unseen problems. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants boiled water when they could, though fuel scarcity often discouraged it. You eye the firewood pile and understand the trade-off immediately. You feel fine, mostly. A little tired, a little hungry. Nothing alarming. That's the danger. Illness on the trail often started subtly, more rooted. You feel a flicker of concern, then push it aside. Worry is exhausting, and you're already tired.
Light joke number 3 appears thin but sincere as you mentally promise your immune system a raise. Do your thing, you whisper internally. I believe in you. Dinner is quieter tonight. People eat, but conversation dips. Attention drifts toward the fire, toward small, manageable tasks. You wash your hands more thoroughly than usual, scrubbing with cold water until your fingers ache. It feels proactive. It feels like enough.
A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Many immigrants relied on folk remedies for illness, herbs, poultices, prayers, because trained doctors were rare on the trail. You see this now as someone offers a tea brewed from something they insist helps with coughs. The sick person drinks it, because hope is always easier to swallow than despair. Historians still argue how effective these remedies were. Sitting here, watching steam rise from a cup, you decide that comfort alone might have been worth it. Night falls, and with it comes a kind of vulnerability. Sounds carry differently in the dark. A cough feels louder. A groan feels heavier. You lie down listening, aware of your own body in a new way. You notice your breathing. You notice your throat. You notice everything, which is never reassuring. And yet, you sleep. Morning comes quietly. The sick person is still sick. No better, no worse. The trail moves on anyway. That's another lesson illness teaches you here. It doesn't stop the journey. It simply reshapes it.
You shoulder your pack, guide the wagon forward, and step into another mile. You are still healthy, still moving, but now you know how quickly that could change. Illness doesn't need drama or distance. It rides quietly, patiently, waiting for fatigue to open the door. This section of the trail hasn't taken you down yet. It's just reminded you that survival isn't only about avoiding visible dangers. Sometimes it's about noticing the quiet ones before they notice you.
By now, the trail has taught you a new rhythm. Morning comes not with enthusiasm, but with obligation. You wake because everyone wakes. You move because the line moves. Today, that rhythm stutters. Not enough to stop, just enough to irritate. The wagons ahead slow, then stop, then start again. Word drifts back that someone's animal has gone lame.
You walk forward to look. A single ox stands oddly, favoring one leg, head low, breathing heavier than it should be. There's no drama in it, no collapse, just the unmistakable truth that this animal cannot pull like it did yesterday. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Draft animals, especially oxen, were the backbone of the Oregon Trail, and losing one could doom an entire journey. You study the animal the way everyone does, as if observation alone might fix it. Someone presses a hand against the leg, feeling for heat. Someone else mutters a suggestion that sounds confident, but isn't. The ox flicks its tail, unimpressed by human concern.
Historians still argue whether emigrants overworked their animals or whether the trail itself was simply unforgiving. Standing here, you suspect both can be true at the same time. A quirky tidbit floats in from the past. Some travelers believed talking kindly to animals improved their stamina. You hear someone doing exactly that now, murmuring encouragement, like the ox understands English, or at least tone. You find yourself oddly hopeful that it does. Light joke number 1 drifts in as you realize you've silently cheered for this ox more than you've cheered for most people.
The decision-making is slow and careful. Do you rest the animal? Redistribute loads? Trade? Abandon something? Each option costs something else. You feel the weight of those choices, even though they aren't yours to make. This is how survival becomes communal. Your fate tethered to a limping leg that isn't even human. Eventually, loads are shifted. A few heavy items are left behind, placed neatly beside the trail like offerings. You pass a cast iron skillet resting alone in the grass and feel a strange pang. A mainstream fact slides in quietly. Countless items littered the Oregon Trail, marking the slow shedding of necessity.
The caravan moves again, slower now. You feel it immediately. The pace is uneven, jerky. Muscles cool and warm repeatedly, never settling. Fatigue creeps in faster when movement lacks consistency. Historians still argue whether these frequent stops caused more harm than benefit. You don't know, but you do know your legs feel heavier than they did yesterday. By midday, you feel it in yourself, a dull ache that isn't quite pain, a thirst that lingers even after drinking. You remind yourself to sip slowly, to ration sensibly. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some immigrants believed drinking too much water at once caused cramps or illness, so they rationed even when water was available. Light joke number 2 appears as you take the tiniest sip imaginable and think, this is what hydration anxiety looks like. The sun climbs higher. Dust thickens. The injured ox breathes harder. You start to understand how fragile progress really is. It isn't just about moving forward. It's about maintaining the ability to move at all. Every mile depends on systems working quietly in the background. Animals, wheels, bodies. A mainstream historical fact returns. Wagons were often overloaded beyond recommended limits. You glance at the sagging frame of one wagon and feel sympathy for both wood and bone. Overloading wasn't greed, it was fear. Fear of not having enough later. Historians still argue whether packing lighter would have saved more lives than it cost. Watching another object get set gently by the trail, you think about how hard it is to abandon the illusion of preparedness. Late afternoon brings a small crisis. The ox stumbles. Not falls, just a misstep, but it's enough to send a ripple of tension through the group. Voices sharpen, movements quicken. For a moment, the calm frays. Then it settles. The animal stands, breathes, continues. Light joke number 3 arrives quietly, a whisper of relief. Okay, you think. We're all pretending that didn't almost ruin everything. You keep walking. Your own feet ache now, blisters forming invisibly beneath socks. You adjust your stride to avoid pressure, a tiny accommodation that feels clever. A mainstream fact nudges you. Foot injuries were common on the trail and could become serious if ignored. Historians still argue whether better footwear would have made a significant difference. You look down at your boots, sturdy but worn, and decide the debate probably didn't matter to the person limping behind you. Camp is made earlier than planned. No one says it outright, but everyone feels the need to stop. The ox is unhitched carefully, laid down with surprising gentleness. Someone brings water. Someone else checks the leg again. The concern feels communal now, almost tender. A quirky tidbit floats in. Some emigrants massaged animal legs with grease or tallow, believing it reduced swelling. You watch someone do exactly that. Hands slick, movements slow and hopeful. Dinner is quieter again. That's becoming a pattern. Conversation narrows to logistics, to tomorrow, to what might be possible if things don't improve. You listen, but you don't speak much. Fatigue has dulled your need to contribute. As darkness settles, you lie down, feeling heavier than the night before. Not sicker, not injured, just worn. You realize how narrow the margin is. Survival here isn't about heroics. It's about not losing a step, not losing an animal, not losing the quiet systems that carry you forward. You drift towards sleep with the sound of the ox breathing nearby. Slow, uneven, but steady. It's strangely comforting. Progress may be slower tomorrow, or impossible. You don't know. What you do know is that one lame leg has reshaped the entire journey. And if something this small can do that, you begin to understand just how thin the line is between moving on and stopping forever. Morning light reveals movement before intention. You wake to the sound of hooves and paws and wings, soft, scattered noises that suggest life has been busy while you slept. Animals don't wait for permission to begin their day. They simply do. You sit up slowly, joints protesting in a way they didn't back home, and take stock of what shares this space with you. Closest are the oxen, broad and patient, already chewing. Their calm feels deliberate, practiced over generations. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Oxen were preferred over horses by many immigrants because they were hardier, cheaper, and more resilient to poor forage. Watching them now, you understand the logic. They move like nothing surprises them.
You step around the wagon and nearly trip over a chicken that has wandered far too confidently into your path. It squawks indignantly, as if you're the one out of place. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some families brought chickens along the Oregon Trail for fresh eggs, herding them each morning and evening like feathery afterthoughts. You marvel at the optimism required to manage poultry in the wilderness. Light joke number 1 arrives as you apologize to the chicken. Out loud. No one comments.
As the camp stirs, you notice smaller animals too. Dogs stretching awake, cats slinking through shadows, opportunistic and alert. These animals aren't just companions, they serve purposes: guarding, hunting, pest control. A mainstream fact follows quietly. Dogs were common on the trail, though they required extra food and care that not everyone could spare. Historians still argue whether bringing pets increased survival odds or simply added emotional comfort. You watch a child laugh as a dog chases its own tail, and suspect the answer depends on how much morale matters.
Breakfast is interrupted by motion near the edge of camp. A deer stands watching, still as a carved figure. It doesn't flee immediately, it assesses. You hold your breath, not wanting to break the moment. Then it's gone, bounding away with effortless grace that feels unfair. Light joke number 2 slips in as you think, yes, okay, rub it in. Must be nice.
The trail resumes, and with it comes the awareness that not all animals are benign. You keep an eye on the grass now, scanning for movement. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Emigrants feared rattlesnakes intensely, sometimes more than justified, often killing any snake they encountered out of caution. The fear lingers in you too, even though you haven't seen one. Historians still argue whether snakebite deaths were as common as trail lore suggests. You decide it doesn't matter. Fear itself shapes behavior, making every step more deliberate. By midday, flies gather. They buzz persistently, drawn to sweat, to animals, to everything organic. You wave them away constantly, an unconscious dance. A mainstream fact settles in. Insects weren't just annoying, they contributed to disease spread and animal distress. You notice how the oxen flick their tails endlessly, how horses stomp in irritation. The entire caravan seems slightly more on edge. Animals transmit their moods easily. Light joke number 3 arrives thin and tired as you realize you would trade almost anything for a single fly-free minute.
As the day warms, you hear it before you see it. A low growl somewhere off the trail. Conversation hushes. Hands tighten around tools that double as weapons. The sound fades without revealing its source. A wolf, maybe, or a coyote, or just imagination amplified by exhaustion. A mainstream historical fact presses in gently. Predators rarely attacked wagon trains, but fear of them was constant. You feel that fear now, more psychological than practical, but no less real. Historians still argue how often large predators posed genuine threats to emigrants. Walking again, heart rate settling, you suspect the threat lived mostly in the mind, but minds still guide feet. Later, you pass the remains of an animal by the trail. Nothing graphic, just bones, clean and sun-bleached. It's a quiet reminder that this land feeds on life as much as it supports it. You step around carefully, instinctively. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants scavenged bones for tools or buttons when supplies ran low. You look at the bones, and then at your hands, and decide you're not there yet. As afternoon drags on, domestic animals struggle again. The lame ox from yesterday moves stiffly but steadily. You feel a surprising surge of pride, as if you had anything to do with it. Animals become symbols out here, vessels for collective hope. You walk beside a wagon where a child rides with a cat perched on their lap. The cat watches you with narrowed eyes, judging. You feel judged. As camp forms again, animals dictate placement. Wagons aligned for shelter. Oxen are tied where grass is thickest. Chickens are corralled with mild chaos. Dogs patrol instinctively. The scene feels rehearsed, though you know it's all improvisation. A mainstream historical fact settles in softly. Managing animals consumed enormous time and energy on the trail. You feel that now as evening chores stretch longer than expected. Historians still argue whether emigrants underestimated the labor animals required. Watching someone chase a stubborn chicken through camp, you think the answer is yes. Night brings new sounds, howls far away, insects close by, the constant breathing of animals nearby. It's oddly comforting. You're not alone. Not really. You lie down listening, aware that survival here isn't just human effort. It's a collaboration across species, fragile and imperfect. Animals carry you, feed you, warn you, and sometimes fail you.
Tomorrow, one might wander off. Another might recover. Another might not. You can't control that. You can only keep moving, step by careful step, sharing the trail with creatures who never agreed to be here, but carry you anyway.
By the time you notice the tension, it has already settled in. It doesn't arrive loudly. It seeps. It lives in pauses between sentences, in looks held a second too long, in the way people step just slightly wider around one another. You're tired now, bone tired, and everyone else is too. This is when people start becoming a problem.
You walk beside the wagon line and overhear a disagreement that isn't quite an argument yet. It's about pace. Someone thinks you're moving too slowly. Someone else thinks slowing down is the only reason anyone's still alive. Both are probably right. A mainstream historical fact drifts in calmly. Conflicts within wagon trains were common, especially as fatigue, hunger, and fear accumulated. You keep walking, pretending not to hear, because that's what survival often looks like. Strategic ignorance. You don't need to be involved in every disagreement. In fact, involvement is a liability.
Historians still argue whether wagon trains benefited more from strict leadership or loose cooperation. Listening to voices tighten behind you, you suspect the answer depended entirely on personalities. At the next pause, someone refuses to help adjust a load. They say they're exhausted. Someone else snaps back that everyone is exhausted. Silence follows, thick and uncomfortable. You focus on your hands, on the texture of rope against your skin, grounding yourself in something physical. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some wagon trains drafted written rules before departure, outlining responsibilities and punishments. You imagine how well that would be working right now, and almost laugh.
Light joke number 1 arrives quietly as you think, ah yes, a code of conduct. Surely that would calm everyone down. As the day progresses, tempers flare more easily. Small mistakes become personal. A spilled cup, a missed turn, a misunderstood comment. You notice how quickly blame attaches itself to faces. Stress demands a target. A mainstream historical fact presses in gently. Divisions along class, regional background, and religion sometimes fractured groups. You hear accents clash now, subtle but present. Different expectations about authority, about fairness, about how things should be done.
Historians still argue how often these conflicts led to violence. You hope the answer is rarely, but hope feels thin when voices rise. Midday brings heat, and with it, irritability. Sweat drips into your eyes. Your pack rubs wrong. Someone bumps into you accidentally, and for half a second, you feel a flash of anger that surprises you. You swallow it immediately, startled by how close it was. Light joke number 2 flickers as you mentally apologize to your past self for judging historical people so harshly. I get it now, you think. I really get it.
You stop near a wagon where a family is eating quietly, deliberately separate from the others. Isolation can be protection. A fringe tidbit drifts in. Some emigrants chose to split from wagon trains entirely after disputes, traveling independently at great risk. You glance at the open land and shudder at the thought. Historians still argue whether splitting off improved survival odds or drastically worsened them. Looking in the endless horizon, you're fairly sure loneliness here is its own danger.
As afternoon wears on, leadership is questioned openly. Someone suggests a new route. Someone else insists the map says otherwise. The map is unfolded, creased and worn, its authority both absolute and questionable. You lean in, squinting, even though you can barely read it. A mainstream fact settles in. Maps of the Oregon Trail were often incomplete or inaccurate, based on second-hand reports. The realization doesn't help morale. Light joke number 3 surfaces dryly as you think. Nothing builds confidence like arguing over a vague line drawn by someone who's never been here.
Eventually, a decision is made, not because it's clearly right, but because standing still is worse. That's how many decisions happen out here. Motion as compromise. You feel relief just to move again, even if doubt trails behind. Later, you notice someone walking alone, shoulders hunched. Another pair whispers nearby, glancing over occasionally. Social fractures are forming, subtle but real. You become more careful with your words, more neutral in tone. You're managing relationships now, as much as supplies.
A mainstream historical fact returns softly. Loneliness and mental strain were serious challenges on the trail, though rarely recorded. You feel it in the quiet moments, in the sense of being surrounded yet alone. Historians still argue how emotional stress affected physical survival. You suspect the connection was strong. It feels strong in your chest. As camp forms again, seating arrangements shift. Groups cluster differently. The firelight reveals faces tired enough to forget politeness. Dinner passes with fewer jokes, fewer shared stories. Everyone eats quickly, guarded. You lie down that night, replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you should have spoken, or stayed silent, or smiled more. People problems linger longer than physical discomfort. You feel them echo. And yet, morning will come. It always does. With it, another chance to cooperate, to forgive, to ignore, to adapt. Survival here isn't just about enduring the land, it's about enduring each other. You close your eyes, knowing that even if the trail itself were gentle, which it isn't, people would still make it hard. Not out of malice, but out of exhaustion, out of fear, out of being human. One more mile waits, and whether you survive it may depend less on weather or water, and more on whether everyone can keep it together just a little longer. The morning begins with a familiar tug of fatigue, a slow pressure in your shoulders and legs that wasn't fully gone after last night. You move almost by instinct, muscles remembering the rhythm of walking beside wagons, the small adjustments to avoid rocks and roots, the tiny pivots to keep balance while hauling or pushing. A mainstream historical fact drifts in quietly. Emigrants often average 10 to 15 miles per day, though terrain, weather, and health could reduce that significantly. Right now, your body feels like it has already walked more than it has, a subtle reminder that distance on the Oregon Trail is both physical and psychological. You notice the sun is warmer today, climbing quickly, and that the dust has a way of finding every crease in your clothing, every pore on your skin. Even with careful planning, the trail imposes itself upon you. You wipe sweat from your brow and realize how much you underestimate the small discomforts: dust in your mouth, the weight of damp boots, a strap that rubs uncomfortably against your shoulder. Comfort, it seems, is a relic from another life. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some emigrants sprinkled ashes on dusty trails or wetted their clothing to settle dust, believing it made travel more bearable. You glance at your own boots and consider the practicality of the idea, though the water is too scarce to experiment. Light joke number 1 drifts in as you imagine sprinkling ashes over yourself, like a ceremonial dust bath. Yes, this is exactly what I trained for, you mutter, unamused. The wagons move steadily, but unevenly. Some wheels catch on roots, some roll with surprising ease. You begin to notice the subtle cues that indicate strain. An ox shifting weight to compensate for uneven ground, a wagon axle creaking under the stress of yesterday's river crossing, a wheel slightly tilted from repeated bumps. A mainstream fact returns. Maintenance was constant on the trail. Even small issues, if ignored, could turn into serious problems that halted progress for hours or days.
Historians still argue whether emigrants were better served by preventative maintenance or reactive repair. Walking here, you suspect a mixture of both was the only viable strategy. Prevention is ideal, but sometimes life and wagons demand improvisation. You check your own supplies again, mentally cataloging tools and spare parts, aware that every nail, wedge, and rope might be crucial before the day ends.
By mid-morning, minor frustrations compound. Hunger is not urgent, but it hums in the background, a persistent reminder that you rely on limited rations. The air is dry, making the effort to chew and swallow slightly more cumbersome than usual. You sip water carefully, rationing in a subtle, constant way. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some travelers carried small tokens or charms that they associated with survival, believing that luck, though intangible, was essential. You pat your pocket absent-mindedly, wondering whether your own small charms are doing anything beyond providing reassurance.
Light joke number 2 arrives as you imagine telling a historian, decades later, "Yes, I survived thanks to this very lucky pebble. Do not underestimate it." As the wagon train moves, conversation dwindles to practical matters. There is little storytelling today, fewer jokes, decisions about which path to follow, which hill to climb, which creek to ford dominate thoughts. The collective mind shifts towards efficiency. Small annoyances, like the squeak of a wheel or a stubborn pack strap, feel amplified. Each minor issue could slow the entire group if unattended. You notice yourself checking straps and ropes, tightening just enough to prevent disaster, but not enough to strain the fabric.
A mainstream fact emerges naturally. Travel required constant vigilance. Even well-planned routes demanded attention to minor details, because small oversights could cascade into delays or injuries. You feel that truth in the tendons of your arms and in the subtle twinge in your lower back. Each adjustment is a quiet negotiation with reality. Historians still argue whether meticulous preparation or adaptive improvisation led to higher survival rates. You suspect the answer was heavily situational. Right now, improvisation is unavoidable, but preparation buys you time to adapt thoughtfully. The thought comforts you just enough to carry on. As afternoon drifts in, the land begins to change subtly. Trees grow denser. The ground slopes in ways that force careful navigation. Your feet feel every contour. A fringe tidbit floats to the surface. Some emigrants marked particularly tricky terrain with sticks, stones, or chalk, creating an informal map for those who followed. You glance at the rising hill ahead and imagine leaving your own discrete markers, though you know there's no one following closely enough to notice.
Light joke number 3 drifts in as you picture a future historian discovering your trail markings and writing an academic paper. The Pebble Hypothesis, evidence of early emigrant communication. You suppress a chuckle and tighten your grip on the wagon.
The wagon ahead slows unexpectedly. An axle hums, then creaks. Someone steps out to inspect. You step closer to help without asking, a matter of instinct. The wood is warm from sun exposure. You press fingers to metal fittings, feeling the faint vibration of stress. A mainstream fact surfaces. Constant wear on wagons required frequent inspection and repair, often under conditions that were hot, dusty, and exhausting. Even the most mundane task demanded care and patience. Historians still argue whether wagons should have been lighter or reinforced with stronger materials. Observing the subtle flecks of the wood beneath you, you realize the debate is academic. Here, the choice is simple: repair what is in front of you, or halt entirely. The wagon crew works methodically, moving parts with care, improvising with rope and wedge when nails are insufficient. you feel the quiet satisfaction of productivity. Each repair, however minor, is a step toward survival. The slow rhythm of labor and observation begins to lull your mind into a muted focus. The heat, dust, and effort combine into a drowsy awareness that borders on meditation. By evening, the repairs are complete and the wagons are back on the trail. The sun leans low, casting long shadows over the landscape. You feel the subtle cumulative strain of the day. Legs ache, shoulders protest, your stomach hums, water is finite, and dust clings relentlessly. Survival is no longer theoretical. It is tangible in every movement, every careful decision, every calculation of effort versus reward. Sitting near the fire that evening, you reflect on the day. The trail doesn't forgive in bursts. It punishes quietly, patiently, cumulatively. You feel fatigue and minor aches in places you didn't know could feel sore. A mainstream historical fact reasserts itself softly. Injuries, even minor ones, could escalate into major problems because rest, treatment, and medical care were limited. You rub your calves, imagining the countless travelers who ended the day with similar complaints, their progress halted by small, persistent discomforts.
Historians still argue how often these minor injuries led to death versus merely delaying progress. You decide the answer is irrelevant. You are present, you are moving, and that counts for something in this slow, relentless journey. As darkness settles, stars emerge faintly, blurred by dust and fatigue-induced haze. You lie down, listening to the creak of wagons cooling in the evening air and the distant chatter of animals settling in for the night. Tomorrow will bring another day of miles, obstacles, and adjustments, and you will face it exactly as you do today, with cautious steps, careful observation, and the awareness that every choice matters.
The dawn greets you with a soft, muted light, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but slowly insists on waking. You rise with muscles stiffened by yesterday's exertions, feeling every tendon and joint protest in a rhythm you've come to know intimately. You adjust your pack, already aware of the subtle abrasions from straps and belts, and step into the dust that clings stubbornly to everything in camp. A mainstream historical fact surfaces gently. Early morning travel was common to take advantage of cooler temperatures and to maximize daylight hours, though the strategy often intensified exposure to dust and dew.
You trudge along the trail, and the quiet morning allows you to notice the smallest details. The way the grass bends under a breeze, the pattern of shadows across rocks, the distant sound of water gurgling somewhere off trail. Each observation is soothing, almost meditative, yet you remain acutely aware of the subtle signs of danger. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. Some emigrants believed that watching animal behavior closely in the morning could predict weather changes or obstacles ahead. You glance at the oxen moving steadily, the dogs sniffing the wind, and wonder if instinctive animal wisdom might sometimes surpass maps and charts.
Light joke number 1 drifts in as you imagine consulting the ox for a weather forecast. Tell me, wise one, will it rain or shall we suffer sunburn?
The wagons move steadily, but the terrain is changing again. Small rises and dips, seemingly harmless, slow progress more than any river or hill could. The repeated strain on wheels and axles is subtle, yet persistent, reminding you that survival is often determined not by dramatic events, but by the accumulation of small, repeated stresses. A mainstream fact settles quietly. Mechanical failures from constant travel were routine, and emigrants learned to anticipate problems by inspecting every wheel, axle, and harness daily. You check your own wagon methodically, tightening loose ropes and testing joints, aware that neglect now could lead to hours of back-breaking repair later. Historians still argue whether overloading wagons with supplies or attempting lighter loads led to higher survival rates. Looking at the sagging wood and the strained oxen, you suspect both had their risks. The trail allows for no perfect choice, only decisions tempered by necessity and fatigue. As the sun rises higher, hunger begins to whisper again. You are careful to sip water slowly, rationing the finite supply. The trail makes subtle demands, not just on your body, but on your awareness and discipline. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants carried hard candies or small tokens of food morale, believing the small sweetness could bolster spirits and stave off despair, even briefly. You unwrap a single sugar cube from your own modest stash, feeling a fleeting sense of comfort as it melts on your tongue. Light joke number 2 flits through your thoughts. Behold, the magic cube that sustains life itself, you murmur to no one.
By midday, the pace becomes uneven. Wagons stretch into irregular lines as oxen tire or terrain complicates progress. Conversation diminishes. People speak only when necessary, conserving energy and patience. You notice subtle signs of fatigue in companions, a slower step, a glance that lingers, a sigh that carries more weight than it should. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Fatigue-related accidents were surprisingly common on the trail, often caused by overexertion combined with inattention. You feel this truth in your own weary movements, adjusting your steps carefully to avoid miscalculations. Historians still argue how much fatigue versus lack of experience contributed to accidents. You suspect the two are inseparable, intertwined in the steady wear of each mile. As the afternoon sun climbs, insects arrive in swarms. Flies buzz insistently around animals and people alike, a subtle reminder that discomfort is constant. A fringe tidbit drifts to mind. Some emigrants tied fragrant herbs to harnesses or hung them around camp to deter insects, though with inconsistent results. You wave away flies as you walk, already accepting that some battles on the trail are unwinnable.
Light joke number 3 surfaces faintly as you imagine writing a Yelp review for the insects. 2 stars, persistent, unrelenting, and very judgmental. The terrain grows rockier, demanding greater attention. Every step becomes a negotiation between balance and speed. Oxen strain under the uneven ground, wheels jolt and creak. A mainstream fact settles in softly. Careful navigation and constant maintenance were essential, as a single misstep could damage wagons irreparably or injure animals. You pause to tighten a harness, adjusting the weight to prevent further strain, aware that this quiet diligence could mean the difference between reaching the next river safely or spending hours repairing broken equipment.
Historians still argue whether emigrants who stopped frequently for minor repairs survived at higher rates than those who pressed on despite small damages. Watching the subtle shifts in wagons and animals, you suspect that patience was often the better ally.
As evening approaches, the sun leans low, casting long, forgiving shadows across the trail. You feel the subtle accumulation of heat, dust, and exertion in your body. Small aches persist, your appetite hums faintly, and your mind churns quietly through calculations of distance, supplies, and the unpredictable moods of animals and companions. Survival here, you realize, is not heroic. It is quiet, methodical, a series of small, deliberate acts repeated day after day.
The camp forms. Oxen are fed, wagons are checked, and the fire is lit. Dinner passes quietly. Conversation is minimal, punctuated by small laughter or murmured observations. You sit, muscles sore, aware of the delicate equilibrium that keeps the group moving safely. A mainstream historical fact returns gently. Emigrants' mental resilience was as crucial as physical endurance, with morale directly influencing both pace and decision-making. You sip water slowly, appreciating that small comforts, the warmth of the fire, the simple act of eating, the familiarity of routine, are as vital as food or shelter
Historians still argue whether psychological preparation or sheer stubbornness mattered more for survival. You suspect both were indispensable, intertwined in a delicate dance that allowed people to endure, mile after mile, day after day. As night descends, the stars appear faint through dust and haze. The air cools and the trail falls quiet, interrupted only by the rustle of animals settling and the creak of wagons. You lie down, body heavy but steady, thinking of tomorrow and the miles yet to come. The trail is neither cruel nor kind. It simply is, and your survival depends on noticing the subtle demands it places on body, mind, and spirit, and meeting them again and again.
The morning is quiet in a way that feels deliberate, almost conspiratorial, as if the trail itself is holding its breath. You rise slowly, every joint reminding you of the miles already traveled, the uneven ground, and the constant tug of the wagon harness. You step outside the wagon canvas and feel the dry air cling to your skin. A mainstream historical fact drifts in gently. Most travelers aimed to begin before the sun fully climbed, taking advantage of cooler temperatures to preserve energy and prevent dehydration. The early hours feel both forgiving and deceptive, masking the exhaustion that will build as the day progresses.
You walk beside the wagon line, boots sinking slightly in the dust, listening to the subtle hum of the caravan waking. Oxen shift under their harnesses, tails flicking lazily at persistent flies. Chickens cluck and flutter, reminding you that life on the trail extends beyond humans. A fringe tidbit drifts in. Some immigrants believed that letting livestock graze strategically along the trail increased their stamina and morale, even if it meant losing a bit of time. You glance at the grazing animals, half amused and half convinced that there may be some truth to the superstition.
Light joke number 1 arrives as you imagine a council of oxen convening to vote on which route will be easiest today. Democracy at its finest, you mutter under your breath.
By mid-morning, the heat begins to press in. You feel it slowly at first, a subtle weight across your shoulders, in the curve of your spine, in the sweat clinging to your forehead. You sip water carefully, rationing the scarce resource. Hunger is quiet but insistent, like a soft drumbeat reminding you of finite supplies. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Dehydration and insufficient caloric intake were frequent causes of fatigue and illness among immigrants. Even minor deficits could compound over long days, slowing progress and sapping morale.
Historians still argue whether the slow onset of dehydration or malnutrition contributed more to accidents and minor injuries. Standing here, you suspect the two are inseparable, intertwined in the quiet erosion of energy. The wagons navigate uneven terrain, wheels crunching over rocks and roots. You notice subtle signs of wear, a rope fraying slightly, an axle flexing more than usual, an ox shifting its weight to compensate for uneven footing. Each observation is essential, a reminder that survival relies on constant attention. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some immigrants carried improvised repair kits with nails, leather strips, and even wagon wheel grease, crafting solutions from necessity. You tighten a rope and patch a minor snag, feeling a muted satisfaction and small competence. Light joke number 2 flits into your thoughts. Trail maintenance, now featuring the human handyman extraordinaire.
As the sun climbs higher, tension among the travelers grows imperceptibly. Small irritations accumulate. Someone walks too close. Another misjudges a turn. A misaligned wagon threatens to bump a wheel. Voices rise slightly, then settle. A mainstream fact drifts into focus. Interpersonal conflict was common on the trail, often spurred by fatigue, hunger, or stress. Even minor disagreements could linger and fester, subtly shaping group dynamics. Historians still argue whether strict leadership or cooperative flexibility better maintained cohesion. Observing the delicate negotiations over pace and spacing,
You sense that success depends less on structure and more on patience. By early afternoon, fatigue is tangible. Every step feels slightly heavier. Sweat stings your eyes, and dust mixes with it, leaving a gritty residue. You notice the oxen's measured pace, the subtle adjustment of their shoulders and hooves. A mainstream historical fact returns. Draft animals were remarkably resilient, but required constant care. Even minor injuries could slow the entire caravan. You check the animals again, feeling the reassuring warmth of a steady, breathing ox beneath your hand. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants whispered to their animals, claiming it soothed fatigue or pain. You murmur a quiet encouragement to an ox as you pass, half skeptical, half relieved to feel a response, a subtle, patient sway of its head. Light joke number 3 creeps in, soft and weary. Yes, you get a pep talk too. Don't act like humans are the only ones exhausted.
Later, a slight mishap forces a stop. One wheel wobbles, a misaligned axle threatening to destabilize the wagon. Immediate repair is necessary, and the caravan gathers around. Tools are pulled, ropes tightened, a spare wheel brace adjusted. A mainstream fact slides in unobtrusively. Such stops were routine, sometimes lasting hours, reminding travelers that progress was measured in inches as often as miles. Historians still argue whether persistent micro-stops were more beneficial than pushing forward despite minor mechanical issues. Watching the group work quietly, you sense that these interruptions, frustrating as they may be, ultimately prolong survival.
By late afternoon, you notice subtle signs of stress among the travelers. The child who had been quietly obedient yesterday now drifts slightly from the wagon. A dog follows a new scent off the trail. A passenger fidgets and mutters. These minor distractions accumulate like dust, barely noticed until they reach critical mass. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants kept small journals to record these moments, believing that chronicling fatigue, conflict, or minor injuries somehow made them manageable. You glance at your own thoughts, considering the idea of recording these subtle observations, not for posterity, but for mental survival. As evening settles, the sun dips behind distant hills, and shadows stretch long and comforting. The wagons form camp. Oxen are fed, water is rationed, and dinner is served in subdued silence. Conversation is minimal. You notice how minor irritations from the day have faded into quiet patience. A mainstream fact surfaces softly. End-of-day routines were critical not just for rest, but for recalibrating social cohesion and mental resilience. Tonight, the trail seems to have yielded a momentary truce.
Historians still argue whether structured evening routines or informal relaxation better preserved health and morale. You sit quietly, water in hand, appreciating the fragile balance achieved. Small comforts, a warm meal, an animal breathing steadily nearby, and the camaraderie of shared survival feel heavier than any burden or fatigue from the day.
As night falls, the stars emerge, muted by dust and lingering warmth. The camp is quiet, alive only with the soft, steady breathing of people and animals alike. You lie down, muscles heavy but functional, mind drifting over the day's miles, obstacles, and interactions. The trail has tested patience, attention, and endurance, and it will continue to do so. Yet survival here, you realize, depends not just on food, water, or shelter, but on noticing subtle cues, making small adjustments, and enduring quietly.
Morning arrives not with urgency, but with a soft insistence, the pale light filtering through wagon canvas and dust-laden air. Your body rises with it, slow, deliberate, each joint reminding you of the miles behind and the miles yet to come. You stretch carefully, aware of tiny aches you didn't notice yesterday, the backs of knees, the crease of a shoulder, the subtle ache in your arches. A mainstream historical fact eases into thought. Pioneers often experienced chronic joint and muscle pain due to prolonged walking and repetitive labor on uneven terrain. You inhale the dry air, savoring a quiet sense of awareness. Pain has become a companion, not an enemy.
The trail hums quietly with activity. Oxen shift under harnesses, tails flicking, hooves crunching in the dust. Chickens wander near wagons, careful yet bold, while dogs weave through legs, alert and watchful. You note the rhythm of animal movement and human effort. It has become meditative, a soft pattern to navigate rather than resist. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some immigrants believe that maintaining eye contact with animals as they worked would improve cooperation and prevent stubbornness. You glance at a particularly obstinate ox, meeting its gaze, half in jest, half in hope.
Light joke number 1 slips quietly into your thoughts. Yes, we're negotiating now. Don't roll your eyes, ox. By mid-morning, the air warms, and fatigue creeps in subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. You feel it in the shoulders, in the spine, in the soles of your feet. Hunger whispers faintly, a soft reminder that your rationing has limits. A mainstream fact drifts in. Food scarcity and fatigue were common challenges, and minor deficits could accumulate into significant physical and mental strain. You sip water carefully, aware that dehydration magnifies every ache and irritation.
Historians still argue whether careful pacing or pushing through exhaustion increased survival odds. You suspect the answer is situational. Sometimes discipline wins, sometimes stubbornness. Today, discipline seems wiser. The wagons navigate gradually rising terrain. Small rocks, hidden ruts, and loose soil demand constant vigilance. You notice how every misstep threatens minor injury or mechanical stress, reminding you that survival is stitched from countless small choices. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some travelers used improvised hiking sticks or poles to steady themselves and reduce strain on legs and wagons. You adjust your grip on a convenient branch, feeling marginally more confident as the wagon lurches over uneven ground. Light joke number 2 flits into your awareness. Ah yes, the branch of survival. Who knew?
By afternoon, the trail feels oppressive in its persistence. Dust curls around boots, into eyes, into every exposed crease. Sweat mixes with grit, leaving a fine layer of discomfort you cannot ignore. You glance at the oxen, moving steadily, and feel a surge of respect. A mainstream historical fact arises gently. Animals often endured harsher conditions than humans, and their loss or injury could drastically change the group's trajectory. You adjust straps on a wagon, mindful that even a minor oversight could cascade into a major problem.
Historians still argue whether overworking animals significantly decreased overall survival rates, or whether occasional strain was unavoidable and accepted. Standing beside the limping ox, you think both were true. The caravan pauses near a small stream, a rare blessing. People and animals alike drink cautiously, aware of the water's limited quantity and potential contamination. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some immigrants carried vinegar or whiskey to mix with water, believing it made it safer to drink. You dip a cup, sniff, and taste, acknowledging the odd comfort in ritual, even when efficacy is uncertain.
Light joke number 3 emerges softly. Ah yes, the secret elixir of survival. Vinegar-flavored hydration. Delicious. Late afternoon brings tension as one wagon struggles with a wheel that refuses to turn smoothly. Tools are brought out, ropes are tied, axles are nudged. Progress slows, and everyone's pace adjusts around the delay. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Minor mechanical failures caused frequent stops, sometimes lasting hours, testing patience and resilience alike. You watch hands work carefully, noting the quiet skill in each movement, and feel a muted sense of solidarity, the slow rhythm of repair binding people together.
Historians still argue whether frequent microstops preserved more lives than pushing forward relentlessly. Standing here, You feel that patience is often underrated, though it requires discipline and humility to practice. As evening settles, the sun leans low, shadows stretching long and golden. Camp forms slowly, with oxen tethered, wagons checked, and firelight flickering over exhausted faces. Conversation is minimal, punctuated by quiet laughter or murmurs. You notice small gestures of care, a blanket adjusted, water rationed, a reassuring pat to an ox or companion. A mainstream fact returns: attention to minor comforts, cleaning, feeding animals, sharing warmth, was as essential to survival as food and water. Historians still argue whether structured routines or informal acts of care more significantly influenced morale. You sense both, intertwined in the soft, unspoken rhythm of the evening. The night stretches quietly, dust settling, stars faintly visible, animals breathing steadily. You lie down with muscles heavy, mind calm but alert to the subtle cues of life around you. Survival, you realize, is an ongoing negotiation with terrain, weather, machines, and creatures, human and non-human alike. The trail will not relent, but for tonight, you rest, prepared to continue, aware that endurance is measured not in heroic acts, but in quiet persistence.
The morning begins with that familiar, quiet insistence, the pale light brushing dust-coated wagons and warm, restless oxen. You rise slowly, every muscle recalling yesterday's exertions, the uneven ground, the relentless miles. Each joint whispers subtle complaints, knees stiff, shoulders aching, arches sore. A mainstream historical fact drifts in calmly. Chronic pain and fatigue were constant companions for Oregon Trail travelers, often persisting day after day, mile after mile. You stretch deliberately, appreciating the small relief in movement before stepping into the persistent dust that clings to skin, clothing, and wagon wheels alike. The caravan moves with a gentle rhythm. Oxen sway with predictable motion, harnesses groaning softly, tails flicking at persistent flies. Chickens cluck and shuffle, dogs weave carefully between legs, alert and watchful. The pattern of movement, sound, and effort is oddly hypnotic, a subtle meditation that carries you forward. A fringe tidbit drifts in. Some emigrants believed humming or quietly talking to animals improved cooperation and morale, a superstition you find yourself half-heartedly participating in as you murmur encouragement to the patient oxen. Light joke number 1 surfaces quietly. Yes, Ox, you're doing great. I'll stop embarrassing myself now. By mid-morning, fatigue seeps in almost imperceptibly, a dull weight pressing on shoulders, spine, and legs. Hunger hums faintly, and the limited water supply dictates small, deliberate sips. A mainstream historical fact asserts itself. Dehydration and caloric deficits were common, quietly compounding fatigue, slowing progress, and increasing the risk of injury or illness. You feel it in each measured step, in the slight wobble when the wagon lurches, in the subtle dragging of boots across dusty ground. Historians still argue whether careful pacing or pressing onward despite exhaustion improved survival odds. You suspect the answer was never simple. Each day demanded adaptation, patience, and keen awareness. By early afternoon, the trail grows rougher. Subtle rises, dips, and rocky stretches demand attention, testing balance and concentration. You notice signs of strain everywhere, a rope fraying on a wagon, an ox shifting its weight, a wheel flexing under repeated stress. A quirky tidbit floats in. Some emigrants used small improvised markers or stones to remember tricky sections of trail for future reference. You glance at the uneven path ahead, imagining leaving a discreet mark, though no one behind you would likely notice. Light joke number 2 drifts in softly. Yes, future historians, please admire my invisible breadcrumb trail. The afternoon brings tension. Minor annoyances grow. A misstep, a bump, a misaligned wagon. Voices rise and settle.
murmurs of impatience and fatigue threading quietly through the caravan. A mainstream fact emerges. Social tension and fatigue were interwoven, each amplifying the other. Minor disputes could sap morale or escalate into delays, testing patience and cooperation. You step carefully, observing both wagons and people, sensing that survival often requires navigating interpersonal terrain as carefully as physical obstacles.
Historians still argue whether strict leadership or cooperative flexibility better preserved group cohesion. Observing subtle negotiations over pace and spacing, you recognize that compromise is often the only viable path. By late afternoon, the trail flattens briefly, offering a small reprieve. You notice the beauty: sunlight catching dust particles, birds tracing lazy arcs above, the distant hills fading into haze. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some emigrants wrote poetry or kept journals to record moments of wonder, a quiet mental survival tactic. You consider scribbling a note in the margins of memory. A pause in motion feels like a pause in worry.
Light joke number 3 surfaces, a whisper of amusement. Yes, note this for posterity. I survived dust, heat, and oxen, and I even appreciated the scenery. As evening approaches, the wagons form camp. Oxen are fed and tethered, water rationed, fire lit, and a quiet meal shared. Conversation is muted. Laughter is rare but soft and treasured. A mainstream historical fact asserts itself gently. Evening routines, whether structured or informal, reinforced both morale and practical survival, allowing people to prepare for another day of uncertainty and exertion. You notice small acts of care: adjusting a blanket, checking a harness, quietly offering water. Historians still argue whether structured evening rituals or informal acts of attentiveness better preserved health and cohesion. You sense both are vital, intertwined in the quiet rhythms that allow survival to continue. Night settles fully, dust and heat fading slightly into cooler air. Stars emerge through a softened haze. The camp breathes as one. Animals huff and shift. Wagons creak as they cool. Humans sigh and settle into rest. You lie down, muscles heavy, mind quiet, yet alert to the soft sounds around you. Survival here is an intricate tapestry. The trail itself, the wagons, the animals, the people, and your own careful awareness woven together in fragile equilibrium. The wind down begins slowly, gently fading both your thoughts and the external world. Dust and fatigue drift away with your breath. Limbs soften under blankets, eyelids grow heavy. The sun's warmth is replaced by night's cool comfort. You inhale, exhale, feeling the day's miles release from your body, the tension from shoulders and back dissolving into the soft rhythm of breathing. Minor aches become background noise, irrelevant to the sense of stillness settling over the camp.
Every mile achieved through subtle observation, patient effort, careful attention, and quiet cooperation. The trail demanded persistence more than heroics, mindfulness more than courage, and you made it this far, step by step, choice by choice, aware that tomorrow you might walk again. But for now, rest is the true reward. The stars shine faintly above. The night embraces every traveler, and the soft sounds of animals and wagons lull your mind. You feel suspended between exertion and sleep, between the rawness of survival and the gentle comfort of stillness. Every breath is a reassurance, a quiet echo of resilience. The trail's challenges remain, but you are not moving tonight. Tonight, you rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.